It's 1991. A successful married mother and businesswoman leaves her family home that she and her husband are in the process of having massively renovated. She seems happy and caught up in the prospect of her new future home, but she will never live to see it completed. Hours later, she will be found in her car, dead from at least 50 stab wounds. Over 30 years later, why is the killer of Ruth Penny Bell still at large? Ruth Penelope Bell, or Penny Bell as she was more often known, was born on the 28th of February 1948. By all accounts, she had a fairly loveless and difficult upbringing. This meant that in later years she was striving to make sure her family, her kids particularly, had a happier time in life. She was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and also a very successful businesswoman. She was a partner in a thriving recruitment company in Kilburn. She lived with her family, husband Alistair, and children Matthew and Lauren in Baker's Wood, which is near Denham in Buckinghamshire. The house they were living in at the time we're looking at was undergoing a major renovation. Penny and all of her family were looking forward to the time when it would all be finished. But on the 6th of June 1991, things would take a very dark turn. The night before, things all seemed fairly normal. Penny's husband Alistair said that she seemed a little preoccupied, but when he quizzed her about this, she said she was just tired. The following morning seemed to start like any other day. Alistair left the house at around about 8:30 to take his son to school. The only other strange thing that happened that he particularly noticed was that, unlike most days, Penny didn't give them their usual wave goodbye. Was this again a case of her being preoccupied with something? Despite this, Alistair said that she seemed quite happy. Around about 9:40, Penny left the house in her very, very distinctive Arctic blue Jaguar XJS. Prior to doing so, she spoke to some of the workmen who were particularly working on the kitchen in the house and said that she was getting a bit late for an appointment that she had. This was rather strange because it would later come to light that her husband wasn't aware of any appointment, nor was anything recorded in her diary, either for work or personally. And so she left the house, it was thought, on her way to this appointment with person unknown, and then on her way to work. The workman who she spoke to in the house incidentally described her demeanour as quite normal. She was happy and she bid them goodbye. It's thought that she made her way along Fulmer Common Road towards London. But a witness would later report that her Jaguar was seen not far from her home at around about 9:50. Another person, this time a man, had been waiting in a brown or bronze car, and he was seen getting out of his car and getting into the passenger seat of a car that looked very much like the distinctive Arctic blue XJS. He was described as white, average build, average height, and in his 40s. The next witness report that we have saw her car driving along Greenford Road at about 10:15. The strange thing here was she was driving quite slowly and quite erratically, doing about 10 to 15 miles per hour, and she had her hazard warning lights on as if something was amiss. But she would not drive on to work. Instead, she would drive to the Gurnell Leisure Centre in Perivale and go into the car park to park up. She was witnessed driving into the car park with someone in the passenger seat, and the person who allegedly saw her said she appeared to be mouthing something, possibly "help me," but for some reason unknown this person didn't make anything of it and ignored it. The car park at Gurnell Leisure Centre is quite a large car park. It can take something in the region of 150 cars, and on this day it was really busy. Now, Penny Bell's car was parked up against a natural hedge, nose in, so the front of the car would have been a little obscured. It would later be reported that she was observed sat in the driver's seat of her car around about 11 o'clock in the morning. She was motionless, but again people didn't make anything of this. They thought she might have been asleep. But around about midday, two women who were going through the car park thought something was strange. The hazard warning lights of the car were still flashing, and they could see Penny's motionless body in the driver's seat. On closer investigation, they found that she was covered in blood and immediately alerted police. Police were quickly on the scene, and when they examined Penny, they found that she was dead, and more horrifically, the fact that she had been stabbed over 50 times. A forensic examination would later establish that she'd been stabbed mainly from the passenger side of the vehicle, but that some of the stab wounds were inflicted from the driver's side. So it would appear that a passenger had attacked her, then got out of the vehicle, gone round to the driver's side and continued the attack. No one had seen the assailant leave the scene of the crime. Police would say that they thought the person would be covered in blood, having stabbed Penny 50 times. But no one was seen with blood-stained clothing fleeing the scene. The only other witness evidence was that someone saw a car, but they couldn't give a full description. The witness simply said that the car followed her at speed along Ruislip Road and then overtook her, flashing its lights. Police immediately launched a murder investigation, and they were trying to fathom out what the motive might be for the killing. It did not appear to be robbery. Penny's personal belongings, including her handbag with some money, were still at the scene. There was also no evidence of sexual assault. A post-mortem determined that Penny had been attacked with a knife approximately 3 to 4 inches in length. And the only other major evidence found at the crime scene were some samples of wallpaper. We think that this was wallpaper Penny might have been choosing for her home renovation. These samples were found on the centre console of the vehicle, covered in blood. It was as if she'd taken them along to show someone. The murder weapon was never found at the scene, and the only thing police would say was that they believed the murder was personal because of the frenzied nature of the attack. It seemed like someone really had a grudge against Penny for some unknown reason. Detective Superintendent Brian Edwards, who headed up the investigation at the time, said that he believed it might have been some form of clandestine meeting that had gone horribly wrong. Or for some unknown reason, Penny might have been lured to the car park to be murdered. But he also said that whatever had happened, looking at the scenario, it was broad daylight in a very, very busy car park. He was shocked that there was no witnesses to the crime, and also the person who probably would have been covered in blood was not seen going away. The killer had vanished without a trace. This meant the police had to look at other evidence surrounding Penny's circumstances. One of the bits of evidence that did come up was that 3 days before the date of her murder, she had gone to the bank and drawn out £8,500 in cash. And this was from a joint account held by her and her husband. Her husband appeared unaware of this. The reason to this day is not known, and nor is the whereabouts of the cash. It was not found at the scene and has never turned up. Does this raise the possibility that Penny was being blackmailed in some way, and when she took the money to meet the blackmailer, things all went wrong and the blackmailer killed her? Police started to look into potential suspects for her murder, and is often the case, Alistair came under scrutiny. Was there any possible motive there? Their marriage seemed quite happy on the surface, but it was known that Alistair was bisexual. Prior to getting married to Penny, he had had a full-blown homosexual relationship. Could there have been a spurned lover in his past who was jealous of his relationship and subsequent marriage to Penny? Nothing came of that investigation, and Alistair was soon ruled out as a suspect. The investigation went on slowly, and in April 1992, a man called John Richmond was arrested. John Richmond was a former neighbour of Penny and her husband, and the reason he was arrested was that he contacted the Sun newspaper and alleged that he'd been the man in the car with Penny on the morning of her murder, but that he'd left her prior to anything happening. Well, this claim was borne out by the fact that his fingerprints were found in Penny's car. But after extensive questioning, the Crown Prosecution Service declined to bring any charges against him, and he was released. Despite the circumstantial evidence of his fingerprints in the car, his claim to have been with Penny, and his further claim of having been in a relationship with her, police said that he was completely in the clear. Strangely, Richmond would again be interviewed by police in December 1994. This time he was making wild claims that Penny Bell had been the victim of a hitman. He also said that he'd been paid a substantial amount of money by the person who'd killed Penny to keep quiet, but this appeared to be an outlandish claim. Although he said he knew the identity of the killer, he never named anyone, and after extensive police questioning, his evidence was again discounted. One other lead that the police looked into was that Penny Bell at one point was a Samaritan. Naturally, she'd been counselling people who were in distress. They wondered whether someone might have harboured a grudge against Penny for some reason stemming from this. But again, it led nowhere. Police even interviewed a man called Robert Napper. Now, some of you might be familiar with that name. He was a man who was convicted in 1992 for the murder of Rachel Nickel. It was a very high-profile murder that was covered greatly in the media. Again, having interviewed him, the lead led nowhere, and he was not thought to have been involved in Penny's murder. So the case went cold. And to this day, all we're left with is a series of questions. Of course, the big question is, who had the motive to kill Penny Bell, and who indeed did kill her? Despite the police looking at her husband, Alistair, he had a seemingly strong alibi, having been at work at the time of her murder. The £8,500 she withdrew from the account was never found, so we don't know what the purpose of that money was. And all of the other leads, including that of John Richmond, came to nothing. Sadly, the strain of the murder took its toll on Penny's husband, Alistair, and he went downhill very rapidly. When their daughter, Lauren, reached the age of 19, he suddenly turned round to her one day and said that it wasn't possible for him to love her anymore, and he asked her to leave the family home. Naturally, this would have come as a massive shock to Lauren. But as the years have gone by, Lauren has never given up on trying to find the killer of her mother. She even teamed up with Brian Edwards, who was the Metropolitan Police officer in charge of the investigation. He was now retired, but the two of them just continued to do detective work to try and find Penny's killer. But despite an investigation costing over £1.5 million, with around about 8,000 people interviewed, Penny's murder remains one of Britain's most notorious unsolved crimes. On the 30th anniversary of Penny's murder, the police opened a cold case review, and a £20,000 reward was offered for any evidence, any new evidence which might lead to the apprehension of her killer. And as far as I'm aware, that reward still remains in place. Lauren was quoted as saying that every big anniversary is significant, but she was also worried that time was running out. On the 30th anniversary, she said that the killer would be 30 years older now, and she feared that eventually he or she would take the secret of Penny's murder to their grave. She said that she was left with a lasting image in her mind of what might have happened in her mum's final moments. She hated the fact that her mum would have been completely terrified. It was the not knowing what had happened that also tortured her on a daily basis, and she still holds out hope that one day justice will be done for her mum, Penny Bell. And we would like to express that same hope that justice will one day be done. And we'd like to send our condolences to Lauren and other members of Penny's family and any friends who knew her. And on that note, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe. And thank you for watching.